political philosophy to try to shift this entire blame onto the federal government. There's plenty of blame to go around. But I don't want to be an enabler to avoid getting to the bottom of what happened and who let it happen. Let me just say, Mr. Early, you said that it was your successor who declined the offer of Detroit Water. But my colleague, Mr. Clay, entered into the record a letter dated March 7, 2014, addressed to Sue McCormick, Detroit Water and Sewer Department, signed by you. And you say in that letter, we expect the Flint water treatment plant will be fully operational and capable of treating Flint water prior to the date of termination. In that case, there will be no need for Flint to continue purchasing water service to serve its residents and businesses after April 17th. Now, Sue McCormick took that letter to be a rejection letter of the offer. Did you intend it to be a rejection letter of the offer?
Let me respond to that letter. There were two very distinct letters back to the Detroit Water and Sewers Department. One was drafted by me before the issues of lead were discussed. That's the letter that you're making reference to. And then there was another drafted by the successor, Mr. Ambrose, that also said the same thing. My letter was in response to the fact that the project was already underway, that the city had invested millions of dollars into the new water system, and they wanted a long-term water agreement, which was not feasible.
Were you aware, when you wrote this letter, of concerns about the quality of water coming from the Flint River?
In March of...
This is March 7th, 2014.
That was before the switch. That was before the switch from the...
But you were planning the switch.
The switch was already planned well before I got there.
I understand.
Yeah.
Were you aware, when you wrote this letter, that there were concerns about the quality of water coming from the Flint River?
We hadn't switched yet. We hadn't...
I'm not asking that question.
Oh, no.
Were you aware? Had anyone brought to your attention?
No.
That there were concerns about the Flint River?
No.
Did you have any reason to believe there could be water quality concerns taking water from the Flint River?
I did not, sir, because the DEQ had certified the water, the state had given the permits, all of the things were necessary to move forward with the project.
Okay. Your testimony today and other things you've written are pretty harsh about the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, correct?
Yes.
You say it missed its opportunity to identify serious pipe corrosion problems. You say that it had multiple emphatic warnings from the EPA. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is it your testimony that MDEQ ignored warnings from the EPA?
I can't speak to why they reacted the way that they did.
I didn't ask that question. Factually, did they, are you saying, by saying that they had multiple emphatic warnings from the EPA? The clear implication of that statement is, and they ignored them. Is that your testimony?
No.
Ms. Hedman, that statement that there were multiple emphatic warnings from the EPA, what is Mr. Early referring to from your point of view?
What date is the letter again, please?
He says in his testimony that the NDEQ received multiple emphatic warnings from the EPA.
I thought you were referring to the letter. Yes, we...
No, I'm not referring to the letter. I'm referring to Mr. Early's testimony.
So in February of 2015, EPA inquired about the type of corrosion control that was being implemented in Flint. And my staff was told that Flint was fully optimized for corrosion control. It wasn't until April 24th that MDEQ admitted to my staff for the first time that Flint was not practicing corrosion control. And at that time, from that day forward, at higher and higher levels at EPA, we repeatedly, emphatically, and urgently told MDEQ that it was important to implement corrosion control as soon as possible.
All right, my time is up. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for the hearing, and I want to thank you again for Thursday's planned hearing. Irrespective of our politics or anything else, this is a catastrophic failure with our citizens. And if government exists for any purpose, It is to protect our citizens in health and safety. And this is a catastrophic failure in that mission.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. We recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
I think the chairman would yield my time to the gentleman from Michigan.
Mr. Wahlberg, sir.
I thank the gentleman from Ohio. Let's go a little bit different track. I'd like to come back to Ms. Hedman again, but first, EPA finally actively intervened in Flint in late January 2016. Mr. Edwards, or Dr. Edwards, in the last few months, what steps have been taken to make Flint's water lead-free? I saw you there Saturday. I saw you talking with residents, talking about filters and all the rest. What steps have been taken?
They have switched back to Detroit water. EPA has implemented very good corrosion control effective December. We believe the lead levels are dropping dramatically as the pipe coating is reestablished. And we are currently sampling with Flint residents last week to see house by house how much lower lead levels are now. And it's our hypothesis that lead is about 4 times better now than it was back during the height of the lead poisoning incidents in Flint neighborhoods.
How long do you think it will take for, reasonably speaking, for Flint's water to be safe?
In order to meet existing federal standards, which is not a high bar, as I've already said, you have to do a federally approved lead and copper sampling event that Flint has never done in its history because they've never sampled the right homes. And they've been using sampling protocols that miss lead and water risk.
Do you have records even of those homes that they have sampled?
Yes, we do. Yeah, and but they did not have lead pipe as is specified. Like other cities around the United States, Philadelphia, it's now acknowledged they didn't sample enough homes with lead pipe, according to the requirements of the law. This is something that EPA has been allowing for since 2006.
Do you believe it's necessary and reasonable for Flint to replace all of the lead pipes?
I think that we have to, obviously that's desirable. I think everyone wants that to happen. No one wants it more than me. But I think we have to consider seriously what's the best place to invest in Flint's future to help Flint get back on their feet. They have needs in terms of the water mains. Flint has more water main breaks per mile than almost any other city in the United States. That's one of the reasons their water bills are so high. So there's many infrastructure needs that have to be addressed, and that's why I'm in favor, although I don't think it does enough, I'm in favor of this Flint bill to get money to Flint residents for their infrastructure.
We had heard, I believe Saturday, 40% water being wasted due to breaks in the lines, leaking out. That's an amazing, and then you're talking about people having to pay those water bills when they're not even getting the water, let alone the water being safe to drink. Let me go back to Ms. Hedman. In your testimony, you stated that, quote, I resigned in part because of the false allegations about me that were published in early January. You specifically cite a January 12th Detroit News article titled, EPA Stayed Silent on Flint's Tainted Water, in which Mark Edwards is extensively quoted saying that the people who knew about the lack of corrosion control should have acted immediately. Let me ask you, is it a false allegation to say that people who knew about the contaminated water should have acted?
No, and we did. We did. As soon as I learned about this, I offered lead experts to the mayor, and we reached out again to MDEQ, and within 3 weeks had reached agreement that MDEQ would order Flint to implement corrosion control as soon as possible. And in the interim, we issued a statement.
I think Mr. Del Toro would not agree with that. Mr. Edwards, what's your position?
She did nothing to protect Flint's children. Nothing.
The article also quoted Michigan Senate Minority Leader Jim Ananek of Flint, who says, anyone who read his memo and failed to act should be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. That's the Minority Leader. of the Michigan legislature, Mr. Ananek. Is he wrong? Ms. Edmond?
Mr. Del Toro's memo contained the same recommendations that I had been receiving from others in EPA who had followed through starting on June 10th, before that Del Toro...
Yet he was disciplined for his memo.
No,
he was disciplined for standing up as a whistleblower.
He was not.
He was absolutely.
He was not.
Mr. Chairman, with that disagreement, I yield back.
Well, if the gentleman yield first, did you make him go through ethics training?
No,
No?
no,
You really believe that? Did you limit his travel?
no,
There was no discipline whatsoever.
none whatsoever.
Is he a hero or a villain in this?
He is a hero, and to be clear, I recommended him for EPA's highest award
When?
in about September, and in his typical modest way, he declined to be nominated because his work wasn't finished.
You need to go back and read the emails and the memos that were provided to us by the EPA, because that is not what was happening within your organization. And you were in charge of that organization.
So I can tell you that my deputy, who was in charge during the time period that you're concerned about, got wind of that. And he went down to the water division and put an end to it. And when I called him, he told me that I didn't even have to tell him. He took care of it.
Did anybody at the EPA do anything wrong?
Are you asking me the question if I could do this all over again?
No, I'm
Is that
asking
something I would
you.
do?
You were in charge. Did anybody at the EPA do anything wrong?
I don't think anyone at EPA did anything wrong, but I do believe we could have done more.
Wow. Mr. Chairman, comments?
Mr. Chairman, I want to clear, well, Ms. Edmond, you're under oath, you understand that?
Yes.
And I think, I just want to make sure you are clear as to what you're saying, because if you're not clear, I don't want you to be subjected to some kind of criminal inquiry here. So I just want to ask you this. Did you retaliate against Mr. Altoro in any way?
Absolutely not.
And so you said something just a moment ago. You said your deputy did something. What was that? You said he cleared it up. What did he clear up?
So after I sent an email to the mayor requested that we reach out to the reporter again. And I replied to the mayor by saying, at this point, I'm not inclined to have my staff have contact with the reporter. They need to finish the report, because I did believe they'd be able to get a final report out. I understand through a series of emails that came to me later, I would say around July 7th or 8th, that was forwarded and interpreted as some sort of direction that nobody was supposed to talk to reporters. And when I saw that email, I called my deputy because I was concerned about the flavor of that interpretation, and he said, no problem, I've already handled it.
All right, thank you, Mr.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now go to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Cartwright, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Early, I want to revisit a question with you on the decision on using the Flint River. You submitted an opening statement in writing, am I correct in that?
That is correct, sir.
And I read it, and it said it was not my decision to use the Flint River, nor was it a two-pronged decision. You said the concept of using the Flint River as an interim water source was inherent in the City Council's KWA vote and Kurtz's March 2013 order. Have I read that correctly?
Yes, sir.
So you said the decision to use the Flint River was inherent in the City Council's vote. That's as opposed to explicit. It was not explicit, correct?
That is correct, sir.
All right. But you know what? That's not what Mayor Walling testified to. In fact, Mayor Walling also submitted a written statement, and he said on page 4 of 9, contrary to the facts, Governor Snyder's office and former emergency manager Darnell Early have stated and repeated blatantly false claims that I and the Flint City Council made the switch to the Flint River. Did you read that? Did you have access to his opening statement?
I did not, sir.
Okay, well, he said that, and Mr. Walling, simply yes or no, do you stand by that remark?
Yes.
That's a yes for the record.
Yes.
All right. So here's the point, Mr. Early. You were the one with the power at the time. I'd like to clarify your powers as emergency manager at the time. I'm going to read to you the passage from the 2012 law that created the position of emergency manager, and it says this: the emergency manager shall have broad powers in receivership to rectify the financial emergency and to assure the fiscal accountability of the local government and the local government's capacity to provide or cause to be provided necessary government services essential to the public health, safety, and welfare. Have I read that correctly?
That is correct, sir.
Mr. Early, do you agree that as emergency manager you had broad powers?
Yes, sir.
And once you issued an opinion, it was law. The emergency manager law says, quote, an order issued under this section is binding on the local elected and appointed officials and employees, agents, and contractors. Have I read that correctly?
Yes, sir.
And you use those broad powers to cut about $18 million from the budget by moving away from the Detroit water to the Flint River. And this was the agenda from Governor Snyder's office to save money. That was the emergency referred to in emergency manager. It wasn't an emergency in the environment or in public water or drinking supply. It was an emergency about money. It was a money emergency manager that you were. In your testimony, you said a proposal to stay on Detroit water was, quote, an unsustainable financial fantasy. If I read that correctly?
Yes, sir.
Did you at any time use your broad powers to request additional state funds to help Flint purchase safe Detroit water during the transition to KWA?
No, sir.
But that's after tens of thousands of people were poisoned by lead in the drinking water of Flint, correct?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Early, it took a public health crisis of these proportions with thousands of victims for Flint finally to receive the state funds it needed to protect its citizens, didn't it?
Yes, sir.
So I wonder what all this says about the governor of Michigan. The emergency manager law says this, and I quote, the emergency manager shall serve at the pleasure of the governor. You are doing the governor's bidding. In fact, I read the Detroit News this morning, and your pastor, Reverend Marlon Jennings, that's your pastor?
He is a pastor that I do know from the city of Flint, yes.
He was talking about you in today's paper. It's unfortunate that he was caught up in this quagmire of responsibility to the governor and his position, and at the same time trying to serve the people of Flint, Jennings said. Quote, it turned out that the two were diametrically opposed. His job as emergency manager is to carry out the wishes and execute the plan and program of the governor. Did you see that in the paper this morning?
I have not seen that yet, sir.
You don't have reason to disagree with the pastor, do you?
Well, I would say that the role is, as defined there, is pretty narrow. It's a much broader role. I think the real goal is to return the city or the school district back to financial solvency.
After all of this, the governor appointed you to be emergency manager of the Detroit Public Schools after you got done with Flint. Your salary for that job was $41,000 more than what you made in Flint. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
It looks like the governor was pleased with your performance in Flint. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hedman, let me come to you because the chairman and the ranking member both question, I guess, your last round of testimony. And so is it your sworn testimony that you did not directly or indirectly retaliate against Mr. Del Toro for him being a whistleblower? Is that your sworn testimony?
My sworn testimony is that I certainly did not, and I have no knowledge of anyone in EPA who did so.
And you've looked very closely at that, because